The dust storm swept across the Montana prairie like a vengeful specter, forcing Virginia Stowe to shield her eyes as she trudged the final mile toward Redemption Springs. 18 years old with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small satchel of belongings, and her mother's locket around her neck, Virginia had spent her last dollar on the stagecoach that had abandoned her 5 miles from town when a wheel broke. Her fingers clutched the crumpled letter from her late aunt's lawyer, her only claim to the boarding house she'd inherited, and her last chance at a new beginning after her parents' passing. Virginia's boots, unsuited for the harsh terrain, had worn blisters on her heels, and her throat burned with thirst. The towering mountains in the distance seemed to mock her as she stumbled forward, the weight of uncertainty and exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, especially to a young woman traveling alone. As she crested the final hill, Redemption Springs came into view. It wasn't the prosperous town her aunt's letters had described. The mining boom had evidently gone bust, leaving behind a shadow of what once was. Virginia's heart sank as she took in the dusty main street lined with weathered buildings. A few horses stood hitched outside the saloon, and a handful of people moved about their business, but the town had a hollow feel to it. She trudged down the hill, her legs wobbling beneath her. The townspeople turned to stare as she passed, their gazes lingering with suspicion and curiosity. Virginia straightened her spine, refusing to show weakness despite her exhaustion. "You look lost, miss," a gruff voice called out. Virginia turned to see an older woman with steel gray hair standing in the doorway of a general store, her arms folded across her chest. "I'm looking for Stowe boarding house," Virginia replied, her voice raspy from thirst. The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Stowe? You kin to Margaret Stowe? She was my aunt. I've inherited her property." A ripple of whispers spread among the onlookers who had gathered. The older woman's expression hardened. "That place is falling apart, been empty since Margaret passed 6 months ago. Nevertheless, it's mine now," Virginia said with more confidence than she felt. A man in a dusty black suit stepped forward. "I'm Mayor Hargrove. We weren't expecting anyone to claim that property. Thought it would go to auction for taxes." Before Virginia could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. A tall man astride a magnificent chestnut stallion rode down the main street, drawing the attention of everyone present. He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle, and Virginia couldn't help but notice his broad shoulders and the way his presence seemed to command respect. "What's all this about?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "This young lady claims to be Margaret Stowe's niece," the mayor explained, gesturing toward Virginia. "Says she's here to take over the boarding house." The newcomer's intense blue eyes studied Virginia carefully. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the slight curl at the corner of his mouth. "Jacob Yates," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I own the ranch north of town." Virginia nodded politely. "Virginia Stowe." "The boarding house hasn't seen a guest in months," Jacob said. "Roof's leaking, and there's talk of tearing it down to make way for a new saloon." Virginia's chin lifted defiantly. "Then it's fortunate I've arrived when I did." Mayor Hargrove cleared his throat. "Miss Stowe, this town isn't exactly welcoming to young women on their own, especially those looking to run a business. Perhaps you'd be better off selling the property and returning east." "I have nowhere to return to," Virginia said firmly. "The boarding house is all I have left in this world, and I intend to make it a success." Laughter erupted from a group of men lounging outside the saloon. "A slip of a girl like you, running a business in Redemption Springs," one called out. "You'll be gone within a week." "They're right, you know," a woman in a garish dress added from the saloon doorway. "This ain't no place for a proper Eastern lady. You don't belong here." Virginia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as more voices joined in, each one insisting she'd never make it, that she didn't belong in their rough-hewn world. Tears welled in her eyes despite her determination not to show weakness. "They said I'd never belong," she whispered, a tear escaping down her dust-streaked cheek. To her surprise, Jacob Yates stepped closer, his tall frame blocking her from the crowd's view. The cowboy smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners with unexpected warmth. "You belong with me always," he said in a voice meant only for her ears. Then louder to the crowd, "That's enough. The lady's had a long journey. She deserves a chance to prove herself, same as anyone who comes to Redemption Springs looking for a fresh start." The crowd fell silent, and Virginia realized that Jacob Yates held considerable influence in this town. Mayor Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "Very well," the mayor conceded. "Miss Stowe, I'll have the property deed ready for you to sign tomorrow, but I warn you, running a business here isn't easy. Especially that old boarding house." Jacob tethered his horse to a nearby post. "I'll escort Miss Stowe to her property and help her get settled." Virginia wanted to protest that she didn't need assistance, but exhaustion and thirst overwhelmed her pride. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. That's very kind." As they walked together down the dusty street, Virginia could feel the townspeople's stares boring into her back. She wondered what had prompted Jacob's kindness, and what he'd meant by those words that still echoed in her mind. "You belong with me always." The boarding house stood at the end of the main street, a two-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. It looked forlorn and abandoned, a far cry from the thriving establishment her aunt had described in her letters. Virginia's heart sank at the sight, but she forced herself to stand tall. "It needs work," Jacob acknowledged as they approached, "but it has good bones. Your Aunt Margaret was well respected here before she fell ill." "You knew my aunt?" Virginia asked, surprised. Jacob nodded. Everyone knew Margaret. She made the best apple pie in the territory and never turned away a traveler, even if they couldn't pay. When the mining boom ended, she kept this place going through sheer determination. For the first time since arriving, Virginia felt a connection to this place, to her aunt's legacy. "That sounds like the woman my mother described. They were estranged for years, but Mom always spoke of Aunt Margaret with respect." They climbed the creaking steps to the porch, and Jacob produced a key from his pocket. "Mayor Hargrove asked me to look after the place occasionally, make sure no one broke in." The door swung open with a groan, revealing a dim, dusty interior. Sheets covered the furniture and cobwebs decorated the corners. But Virginia could see the potential: the solid oak staircase, the large common room with a stone fireplace, the spacious dining area. "6 guest rooms upstairs," Jacob explained, "and your aunt's quarters through that door. There's a kitchen out back and a small garden that's gone wild. Water pump works, and there's a decent well." Virginia walked through the rooms in a daze, overwhelmed by the enormity of the task ahead but determined to succeed. In her aunt's quarters, she found a faded photograph of a woman with her mother's eyes and smile. "Thank you for this chance, Aunt Margaret," she whispered. When she returned to the main room, Jacob had removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave. He looked younger without the hat shadowing his features, perhaps 25 or 26. "It's a lot to take in," he said sympathetically. "Look, I know we've just met, but I'd like to help you get started. I've got some men working for me who could fix that roof and porch before the next rain." Virginia's pride warred with practicality. "I can't pay you, not yet. Consider it a loan. You can repay me once you're up and running." He paused. "Or you could provide meals for my ranch hands when they come to town. Good food is hard to come by in Redemption Springs since your aunt passed." Virginia considered his offer. It seemed fair, and she desperately needed the help. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Yates? You don't know me." Something flickered in his eyes, a memory or emotion she couldn't identify. "Let's just say I know what it's like to arrive somewhere new and have everyone tell you that you don't belong." Before she could question him further, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the grimy window, Virginia saw a group of men on horseback thundering into town, firing pistols into the air as townspeople scattered. "Damn," Jacob muttered, reaching for his hat. "The Caldwell gang. They come through every few months causing trouble. Are they dangerous?" Virginia asked, watching as the riders dismounted outside the saloon. "They can be. Usually they just drink, gamble, and intimidate folks before moving on. But sometimes—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Stay here and keep the door locked. I'll come back once they've gone." Before Virginia could protest, Jacob was out the door, striding purposefully toward the commotion. Through the window, she watched as he approached the gang's leader, a tall man with a silver-handled revolver and a scar cutting across his cheek. Virginia couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the tension in Jacob's shoulders as he stood his ground against the outlaw. After a tense moment, the gang leader laughed and clapped Jacob on the shoulder before leading his men into the saloon. When Jacob returned, his expression was grim. "They'll be in town overnight. Best to stay inside until they leave." "This happens regularly," Virginia asked, appalled. "Why doesn't someone stop them?" "Town's too small for a proper sheriff. We had a deputy, but he left after the mines closed." Jacob sighed. "Most folks just weather the storm when they come through." Virginia's mind raced with all she needed to learn about her new home. She suddenly felt very young and unprepared. Jacob must have read her expression. "Don't worry, they won't bother with an empty boarding house. But this is why I want to help you get established. This town needs good people who are willing to stay and build something worthwhile." Virginia studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful man with the imposing figure who had ridden into town earlier. "You really believe I can make this work, don't you?" He nodded. "Your aunt did, and I see the same determination in your eyes." He moved toward the door. "I should go, get some rest, and I'll be back tomorrow with supplies and a couple of men to start repairs." "Mr. Yates," Virginia called as he reached for the doorknob. "What did you mean earlier when you said you belong with me always?" Jacob paused, a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. "It was just something to shut up the gossips. Don't read too much into it." But as he tipped his hat and left, Virginia couldn't help feeling there was more to his words and to Jacob Yates than met the eye. The night passed fitfully for Virginia, who slept on a dusty mattress in her aunt's room. The distant sounds of revelry from the saloon, occasionally punctuated by gunshots, kept her on edge. By dawn, exhaustion had finally pulled her into a deep sleep, only to be awakened by a firm knock at the front door. Grabbing her mother's old shawl and wrapping it around her shoulders over her rumpled dress, Virginia cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" "Jacob Yates," came the reply. "I've brought help." Virginia opened the door to find Jacob standing on the porch with two other men and a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. "Miss Stowe, this is Hank and Thomas, two of my best ranch hands. They can fix just about anything." The two men nodded respectfully, hats in hands. "Thank you for coming," Virginia said, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Please come in. I'm afraid I don't have anything to offer you for breakfast." "We brought provisions," Jacob said, gesturing to several crates in the wagon. "Coffee, flour, bacon, beans, and such. Enough to get you started." Virginia was overwhelmed by the gesture. "That's incredibly generous. It's practical," Jacob countered with a slight smile. "Can't have you starving before you can feed my ranch hands." While Hank and Thomas began unloading supplies, Jacob led Virginia to the kitchen at the back of the house. Despite months of neglect, the large cast iron stove was in good condition, and the hand pump at the sink still worked after some coaxing. "This kitchen was the heart of your aunt's business," Jacob explained. "Her cooking brought people from miles around." Virginia ran her hand over the worn wooden countertop. "I'm a decent cook. My mother taught me well." "Good. That'll give you an edge." Jacob paused. "The Caldwell gang left at dawn. Town's quiet again." Virginia nodded, relieved. "Do they ever cause real harm?" "Sometimes. Mostly they're just bullies who know no one here can stand against them." He changed the subject. "Mayor Hargrove will be by later with the deed. Don't let him talk you into accepting less than what's rightfully yours." Throughout the day, Virginia watched in amazement as Jacob and his men transformed the boarding house. By noon, the porch had been reinforced, and they'd begun patching the leaky roof. Virginia had cleaned enough of the kitchen to prepare a simple lunch of bacon, beans, and biscuits for the workers. "Miss Stowe," Hank said between mouthfuls, "this is the best meal I've had in months." Virginia blushed at the compliment. "Wait until I have proper ingredients and time to prepare something special." "See," Jacob said with a satisfied nod. "You've already got your first loyal customers." As promised, Mayor Hargrove arrived in the afternoon with the property deed. His eyebrows rose at the sight of the repairs underway. "I see you've wasted no time, Miss Stowe," he remarked, laying out the papers on the newly cleaned dining table. "Though I still think you should consider selling. I know several interested parties." "I'm not selling," Virginia stated firmly. "My aunt built this place, and I intend to honor her legacy by making it successful again." The mayor's lips thinned. "Very well. Sign here and the property is legally yours, but you should know there are 6 months of back taxes due." Virginia's heart sank. She hadn't anticipated this expense. "How much?" The amount the mayor named would have consumed every penny she had if she'd had any left after her journey. Before she could respond, Jacob stepped forward. "I'll cover the taxes. Add it to what Miss Stowe already owes me for the repairs." Mayor Hargrove looked between them with sudden interest. "I see. Well, if you're financially involved, Jacob, perhaps you should be named on the deed as well, for security." "That won't be necessary," Jacob replied coolly. "Miss Stowe and I have an arrangement. The money is a loan, not an investment." After the mayor left, Virginia confronted Jacob in the kitchen. "Why did you do that? I'm already indebted to you for the repairs and supplies." Jacob leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Because Hargrove and his friends have been trying to get their hands on this property since your aunt fell ill. They want to tear it down and build a larger saloon and gambling hall. And you don't want that. This town needs balance. We have enough saloons. What we need are decent places for families and travelers to stay, good meals that don't come with a side of whiskey, and reasons for people to settle here instead of just passing through." Virginia studied him, intrigued by his vision for Redemption Springs. "You care deeply about this town." "I have a stake in its future," he admitted. "My ranch depends on the town's survival, and the town depends on businesses like yours." As the afternoon waned, Virginia worked alongside the men, clearing debris and cleaning rooms. By sunset, the roof no longer leaked, the porch was sturdy, and 2 of the guest rooms had been made habitable. "We'll be back tomorrow to continue," Jacob promised as he and his men prepared to leave. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" Virginia shook her head, exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress. "You've done more than enough. I don't know how to thank you." Succeed, Jacob said simply. Prove them all wrong. After they left, Virginia sat alone on the porch, watching as Redemption Springs settled into evening. Lamps were lit in windows, and music drifted from the saloon. Despite the town's initial hostility, she felt a growing determination to make this place her home. The next morning, Virginia awoke to the sound of voices outside. Peering through the window, she was surprised to see a small crowd gathered on the street in front of the boarding house. Jacob was there along with his men, but so were several townspeople, including the older woman from the general store. Hastily dressing, Virginia went outside to investigate. "What's happening?" Word spread that Jacob's helping fix up the place, Hank explained. "Seems others want to pitch in too." The woman from the general store stepped forward. "I'm Edith Turner. I run the mercantile, knew your aunt well. Thought you might need some help getting this place in order." "And I'm Reverend Wells," an older man with kind eyes introduced himself. "Your aunt was a faithful member of our congregation. We'd be honored to help restore her establishment." Virginia was overwhelmed. "Thank you, but I can't pay. We're not asking for payment," Edith interrupted. "Margaret Stowe helped many of us when times were hard. Consider this repaying a debt." Throughout the day, more townspeople arrived with tools, supplies, and helping hands. Virginia worked alongside them, learning their names and stories, discovering connections to her aunt she'd never known existed. By sunset, the transformation was remarkable. The boarding house's exterior had been repainted, the garden cleared, and all 6 guest rooms made presentable. As the volunteers departed, Edith handed Virginia a basket. "Fresh bread, preserves, and a chicken for your supper. You'll need your strength." Virginia thanked her, touched by the unexpected kindness. "I thought everyone wanted me to leave." "Some do," Edith admitted. "Change makes folks nervous. But those of us who remember your aunt know she'd want her niece to have a fair chance." Left alone with Jacob, who had stayed to secure some loose shutters, Virginia felt a surge of gratitude. "None of this would have happened without you," he shrugged, hammering a nail into place. "You've won them over yourself. They see your determination." "Still, you stood up for me when no one else would." Virginia hesitated. "Why?" Jacob was silent for a long moment, focused on his task. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. 5 years ago, I arrived in Redemption Springs with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. I'd been running from my past, from mistakes I'd made. This town gave me a second chance when I needed it most." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "Your aunt was one of the first to welcome me. She didn't ask questions about where I'd come from or what I was running from. She just offered me a room, a hot meal, and respect." Virginia's breath caught at the raw emotion in his voice. "She sounds remarkable." She was. "And she'd be proud to see you fighting for her legacy." Jacob set down his hammer. "I should go. It's getting late." As he prepared to leave, Virginia impulsively touched his arm. "Stay for supper. It's the least I can do after everything you've done." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They shared a simple meal in the kitchen, talking as the light faded outside. Virginia learned that Jacob had built his ranch from nothing, starting with a small plot of land and gradually expanding until it became one of the most successful operations in the territory. "What about you?" he asked. "What brought you here, besides inheriting the boarding house?" Virginia traced the rim of her water glass, considering her answer. "My parents died last winter, influenza. I was working as a teacher's assistant in Boston, but the school closed due to lack of funding. When I received the letter about Aunt Margaret's property, it seemed like providence." "I'm sorry about your parents," Jacob said softly. "Thank you." Virginia managed a small smile. "They would have approved of this adventure, I think. My father always said I had a pioneering spirit." As Jacob prepared to leave, Virginia walked him to the door. "The boarding house will be ready to receive guests by the end of the week, thanks to you and the townspeople. Will you come to the grand reopening?" "I wouldn't miss it," he promised. True to her word, Virginia worked tirelessly over the next few days. She scrubbed floors, polished furniture, hung fresh curtains donated by the church ladies, and prepared for her first guests. Signs announcing the reopening of Stowe boarding house were posted throughout town and at the stagecoach stop. By Saturday, everything was ready. Virginia had baked pies and prepared a hearty stew, hoping to showcase her cooking skills to potential customers. As noon approached, she paced nervously, wondering if anyone would come. Her fears proved unfounded. By 1 o'clock, the boarding house was filled with townspeople eager to see the transformation. Mayor Hargrove arrived with his wife, begrudgingly admitting that Virginia had accomplished more than he'd thought possible. Edith Turner brought a jar of honey as a housewarming gift. Even the saloon owner, a gruff man named Dawson, made an appearance. "Not bad, Miss Stowe," he commented, surveying the common room. "Might send some of my more respectable customers your way when they need lodging." Virginia smiled. "They'll be welcome as long as they behave themselves." The highlight of the day was the arrival of the afternoon stagecoach, which brought her first official guests, a merchant and his wife traveling to San Francisco. They were delighted with the clean, comfortable rooms and the promise of home-cooked meals. As the celebration continued, Virginia searched the crowd for Jacob but didn't see him. Disappointment pricked at her, though she told herself it was foolish to expect him to attend when he had a ranch to run. It was nearly sunset when he finally arrived, dust-covered and apologetic. "Had trouble with some cattle breaking through a fence. I'm sorry I'm late." "You're here now," Virginia said, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him. "Come in. There's still plenty of food." Jacob surveyed the crowded room with approval. "Looks like a success." "Beyond my expectations," Virginia admitted. "I've already rented 3 rooms for the night, and Reverend Wells has asked if I'd provide Sunday dinner for the congregation tomorrow. See, you belong here after all." As the evening progressed, the crowd thinned until only Jacob remained, helping Virginia clear away dishes and tidy the common room. "Thank you for everything," she said as they worked side by side. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You would have found a way," Jacob replied. "You're stronger than you know." In the quiet of the kitchen, with only the soft glow of lantern light between them, Virginia felt a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Jacob stood close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap beneath the day's dust and sweat. "Virginia," he began, his voice low. A sudden pounding at the front door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Jacob's expression changed instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, moving swiftly to the door. Virginia followed despite his warning, peering around his shoulder as he opened the door to reveal a young boy, no more than 12, breathing hard as if he'd been running. "Mr. Yates, Pa sent me to find you. The Caldwell gang's at your ranch. They're threatening to burn down the barn if you don't show yourself." Jacob's face hardened. "How many?" "5 or 6, sir. They're drunk and angry. Said something about you disrespecting their boss in town last week." Jacob turned to Virginia, his expression grim. "I have to go." "Of course," she agreed, fear knotting in her stomach. "But shouldn't you get the mayor or form a posse?" "No time. And most men in this town won't stand against the Caldwells." He hesitated, then pulled a small revolver from his boot. "Take this. Keep it with you until I return." Virginia accepted the weapon reluctantly. "Be careful. Lock the doors behind me," Jacob instructed before disappearing into the darkness with the boy. Virginia spent a sleepless night, jumping at every sound, the revolver close at hand. Her boarders slept peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding beyond the town limits. By dawn, there was still no word from Jacob, and Virginia's worry had grown into full-blown fear. Unable to wait any longer, she approached Edith Turner at the Mercantile as soon as it opened. "Have you heard anything about trouble at the Yates ranch?" Edith's expression turned grave. "Just rumors. Some say shots were fired. Thomas, one of Jacob's hands, rode through town an hour ago looking for the doctor." Virginia's heart dropped. "Was someone hurt?" "Don't know. But Doc Stevens headed out there right quick." Edith studied Virginia's face. "You care for him, don't you?" "He's been kind to me," Virginia deflected, unwilling to examine her feelings too closely. "I owe him a great deal." Edith wasn't fooled. "Jacob Yates is a good man. One of the best in these parts, but he carries burdens from his past that few know about." "What kind of burdens?" "Not my story to tell," Edith replied. "But if you're fixing to care about him, you should know he's not one to let people get close easily." Virginia returned to the boarding house, her mind whirling with worry and questions. She mechanically prepared breakfast for her guests, served them with a forced smile, and then cleaned the rooms after they departed on the morning stagecoach. It was mid-afternoon when a rider appeared at her door. Hank, his expression somber. "Miss Stowe, boss asked me to return this." He handed her a small leather pouch containing the tax money Jacob had paid on her behalf. "Said to tell you the debt's canceled." Virginia's chest tightened with dread. "Is he all right? I heard there was trouble." "Boss took a bullet in the shoulder," Hank admitted. "Doc says he'll heal, but he'll be laid up for a while. The Caldwells set fire to one of our barns before riding out." "I need to see him," Virginia decided immediately. "Can you take me to the ranch?" Hank looked uncomfortable. "Boss said not to bring you out there. Said you've got your business to run and he doesn't want to be a burden." "That's ridiculous," Virginia snapped, her worry making her voice sharp. "He helped me when I needed it most. I'm not going to abandon him now." After arranging for Edith Turner to watch over the boarding house, Virginia rode out to the Yates ranch with Hank. The journey took nearly 2 hours, during which Virginia had ample time to consider her growing feelings for Jacob and Edith's cryptic warning about his past. The Yates ranch was larger than Virginia had imagined, a sprawling operation with vast grazing lands, a main house built of solid timber, several barns and bunkhouses for the workers. The charred remains of one barn stood as a stark reminder of the previous night's violence. Thomas met them at the main house, his expression guarded. "Boss ain't gonna be happy you brought her here, Hank." "Miss Stowe can be mighty persuasive," Hank replied with a shrug. Virginia dismounted without assistance. "Where is he?" "Upstairs, first door on the right. But don't expect a warm welcome. He's been in a foul mood since Doc dug that bullet out." Virginia steeled herself and entered the house. It was simply but comfortably furnished, with masculine touches that spoke of Jacob's bachelor status. She climbed the stairs and hesitated only briefly before knocking on the indicated door. "Go away, Thomas. I told you I don't need anything," came Jacob's irritated voice from within. Virginia pushed the door open anyway. "It's not Thomas." Jacob was propped up in bed, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale beneath his tan. Surprise, followed quickly by annoyance, crossed his features. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "You shouldn't have left the boarding house." "I made arrangements," Virginia replied calmly, entering the room despite his protest. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," he retorted dryly. "Did Hank give you the money?" "Yes, and I'm not accepting it. Our agreement stands." Virginia pulled a chair to his bedside and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Now, tell me what happened with the Caldwells. Jacob sighed, seeming to realize she wasn't going to leave. They were drunk and looking for trouble. Said I disrespected their leader in town. They'd already roughed up a couple of my men and were threatening to burn down the barns when I arrived. And they shot you. After I shot one of them, Jacob admitted. Nothing fatal, but enough to make them retreat after they set fire to the smaller barn. Virginia studied his face, noting the lines of pain around his eyes. Will they be back, eventually? Men like the Caldwells don't forget grudges. He shifted uncomfortably. Virginia, you shouldn't be here. It's not proper and I don't need looking after. Consider it repaying a debt, she said, echoing what the townspeople had told her. You helped me when everyone else wanted me gone. Now it's my turn to help you. Before he could argue further, Virginia rose and began tidying the room, which showed signs of a bachelor's neglect even before his injury. When did you last eat? This morning. Thomas brought up some coffee and hardtack. Virginia made a disapproving noise. No wonder you're in a foul mood. You need proper food to heal. Despite Jacob's continued protests, Virginia spent the rest of the day setting his household in order. She cooked a hearty stew with vegetables from his garden, aired out the stuffy rooms, and even instructed his ranch hands on the proper way to change bandages and administer the doctor's medicines. By evening, Jacob's mood had improved considerably, especially after a proper meal. Virginia sat with him as darkness fell, a comfortable silence between them. You should head back to town before it gets too late, Jacob finally said. Virginia shook her head. I've already told Hank I'm staying the night. Edith Turner is looking after my boarders and I've prepared enough food for your men for tomorrow. Virginia, people will talk if you stay here unchaperoned. Let them talk, she replied with newfound confidence. I know who I am and what I'm doing. Jacob studied her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You've changed since you arrived in Redemption Springs, grown stronger. I had to, she said simply, and I had a good example to follow. The next morning, Virginia rose early and prepared breakfast for the ranch hands before taking a tray to Jacob's room. She found him already awake, attempting to put on a shirt despite his injured shoulder. What do you think you're doing? She demanded, setting down the tray. I've got a ranch to run, he grunted, struggling with the sleeve. Can't lie around all day. Virginia gently took the shirt from his hands. The doctor said you need at least a week of rest. Your men have things under control. The Caldwells are miles away by now, according to Hank. And if they return, pushing yourself to exhaustion won't help. Jacob reluctantly allowed her to help him back to bed, his face flushing as her fingers accidentally brushed against his bare chest. This isn't right, you taking care of me like this. Would you rather I left you to fend for yourself? Virginia challenged. No, he admitted after a moment, but I don't like being a burden. You're not a burden, you're a friend in need. Over the next 3 days, Virginia divided her time between the boarding house and the ranch, riding back and forth with Hank or Thomas as escort. She established a routine, managing her own business in the mornings and tending to Jacob in the afternoons and evenings. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Virginia found she cared less and less about gossip. What mattered was that Jacob was recovering, his color improving, and his strength returning day by day. On the 4th evening, as Virginia read aloud from a book of poetry she'd found in Jacob's modest library, he interrupted her. Why are you really doing this, Virginia? She lowered the book, meeting his intense gaze. What do you mean? You've established yourself in town. Your boarding house is successful. You don't need my goodwill anymore. He shifted to face her more directly. So why spend your days taking care of a grumpy, injured rancher? Virginia's heart quickened. Because I care about you, she admitted softly. Is that so difficult to believe? Yes, he said bluntly. You don't know me, not really. Then tell me, she challenged. Edith mentioned you carry burdens from your past. What is it you think I wouldn't understand? Jacob was silent for a long moment, his expression guarded. Finally, he sighed. I wasn't always Jacob Yates, respectable rancher. What does that mean? It means I changed my name when I came here. Before that, I was Jesse Young, wanted in Colorado territory for robbery and assault. Virginia's breath caught, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I ran with a bad crowd after the war, Jacob explained, his voice low. Did things I'm not proud of. Then a job went wrong and a man almost died because of me. That's when I knew I had to change. He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. I fled to Montana, changed my name, and used what money I had left to buy a small plot of land. Your aunt was the only one who knew the truth. She helped me establish myself as Jacob Yates. Is that why you helped me? Virginia asked quietly. Because of what my aunt did for you. Partly, he admitted, but also because I saw something in you that first day, a determination to prove everyone wrong. It reminded me of myself. Virginia considered his revelation. Have you hurt anyone since coming here? No, Jacob said firmly. I left that life behind completely. Then your past is your past, Virginia decided. What matters is who you are now, the man who stood up for a stranger when no one else would, who risks his life to protect his ranch and his workers, who believes in second chances. Jacob looked at her with wonder. Most women would be running for the door after hearing what I just told you. I'm not most women, Virginia replied with a small smile, and I believe people can change. You're living proof of that. Impulsively, she reached out and took his hand. Your secret is safe with me, Jacob Yates. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Then Jacob gently pulled his hand away. You should go, he said quietly. It's getting late and you have a business to run tomorrow. Virginia felt the sting of rejection but nodded, understanding that he needed time to process her acceptance of his past. I'll return tomorrow afternoon. Over the next few days, something shifted between them. Jacob became more open, sharing stories of his childhood in Missouri, his experiences during the war, and his dreams for the ranch. Virginia, in turn, told him about her life in Boston, her parents, and her own hopes for the future. By the end of the week, Jacob was well enough to move around the house, though the doctor had forbidden him from riding or heavy labor for at least another 2 weeks. Virginia continued her daily visits, even as her boarding house grew busier with the arrival of several new guests. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Jacob turned to her with unexpected seriousness. Virginia, I need to ask you something. Her heart skipped a beat at his tone. Yes, are you happy here? In Redemption Springs? The question surprised her. Yes, I believe I am. The boarding house is doing well, I've made friends, and I feel like I'm honoring Aunt Margaret's legacy. And what about, Jacob hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. What about us? Virginia's breath caught. Is there an us, Jacob? He met her gaze directly. I'd like there to be, but I need to know if that's something you want too, because if you're just being kind to a man who helped you when you arrived, it's more than kindness, Virginia interrupted, her voice soft but sure. Much more. Jacob reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. When I told you that you belong with me always, that first day in town I meant it, even though I had no right to say such a thing to a woman I just met. Why did you say it? Virginia asked, her heart pounding. Because something inside me recognized something in you, he admitted. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Virginia's eyes filled with tears at the raw honesty in his voice. I felt it too, even then. Jacob leaned closer, his free hand rising to brush a strand of hair from her face. Virginia Stowe, may I court you properly, with the understanding that my intentions are honorable and permanent? Yes, she whispered, unable to contain her smile. I would like that very much. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that held the promise of deeper passion carefully restrained. When they parted, Jacob's eyes were bright with emotion. I need you to be certain, he said seriously. My past could still catch up with me someday. And there will always be men like the Caldwells in these territories. I'm certain, Virginia replied. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. As summer faded into autumn, Jacob and Virginia's courtship became the talk of Redemption Springs. The boarding house flourished under Virginia's capable management, and Jacob's ranch recovered from the Caldwell attack, with a new barn rising from the ashes of the old one. Their routine adjusted to accommodate their relationship. Jacob would often take his evening meals at the boarding house, enchanting Virginia's guests with tales of ranch life. On Sundays after church, Virginia would accompany him back to the ranch for the afternoon, sometimes staying to prepare a special dinner for his ranch hands. It was during one such Sunday visit in late October that Jacob proposed. They had ridden to a scenic overlook on his property, where golden aspen trees framed a view of the valley below. This is where I stood 5 years ago when I first purchased this land, Jacob explained, helping Virginia down from her horse. I looked out at this valley and promised myself I would build something honest and good to make up for my past mistakes. He took both her hands in his. I never imagined I'd find someone to share it with, someone who knows all of me and loves me anyway. Virginia's eyes glistened as she understood where this was leading. Jacob, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Virginia Stowe, I love you with everything I am and everything I hope to be. Would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she answered without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face. With all my heart, yes. Jacob stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with passion and promise. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I want to build a life with you, he murmured. Here, where we both found a second chance. What about the boarding house? Virginia asked, suddenly practical despite her happiness. I can't abandon Aunt Margaret's legacy. We'll keep it, Jacob assured her. Hire a manager perhaps, or run it together. I'm not asking you to give up what you've built. I'm asking to join our lives, our dreams, our futures. They were married on Christmas Eve in Redemption Springs' small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. The entire town turned out for the celebration. Even Mayor Hargrove, who had finally accepted that Virginia was a permanent and valuable addition to their community. Edith Turner wept openly during the ceremony, later telling Virginia, "Your aunt would be so proud not just of what you've done with the boarding house, but of the happiness you've found." As they exchanged vows, Virginia thought back to that first day in Redemption Springs, how lost and alone she had felt, how the townspeople had predicted she wouldn't last a week. They said I'd never belong, she whispered to Jacob later that night as they danced at their wedding celebration in the boarding house's common room. The cowboy smiled, his eyes crinkling with love and happiness. You belong with me always, he replied, drawing her closer, and I belong with you. In the years that followed, their love only deepened. The Yates Ranch prospered under their joint management, and the boarding house remained a cornerstone of Redemption Springs, eventually expanding to include a proper restaurant that became famous throughout the territory for its excellent food. Virginia gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after her aunt, in the fall of 1877. A son, Robert, followed 2 years later. Their family grew alongside their businesses, their home filled with laughter and love. The Caldwell gang returned only once, in the summer of 1878. This time, however, they faced not just Jacob but a town united against them. Led by Jacob and Virginia, the citizens of Redemption Springs had established a proper sheriff's office and formed a town council. When the outlaws rode in, they were met by armed townspeople determined to protect what they had built. Faced with unexpected resistance, the Caldwells retreated without firing a shot, never to return to Redemption Springs again. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Jacob surprised Virginia with a gift, the deed to a plot of land adjacent to the boarding house. "What's this for?" she asked, examining the document. "For the school you've always talked about starting," Jacob explained, his eyes warm with pride. "Redemption Springs is growing. There are enough children now to need a proper teacher." Virginia's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "Your dreams are my dreams, Virginia." Construction on the school began the following spring, with Virginia overseeing every detail. By autumn, Redemption Springs had its first proper school, with Virginia serving as headmistress and teacher, passing the day-to-day management of the boarding house to a capable young couple who had arrived seeking opportunity, just as she once had. Time passed, seasons changed, and Redemption Springs grew from a struggling mining town into a thriving community. Jacob and Virginia stood at its center, respected leaders who never forgot what it meant to be outsiders looking for acceptance. Their children grew strong and independent, raised with stories of second chances and the courage to stand against those who would say, "You don't belong." Margaret, their daughter, eventually took over management of the boarding house, while Robert worked alongside his father on the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. On warm summer evenings, Jacob and Virginia would often sit together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of their children's prospects or new ventures for the town. Other times, they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, marveling at the life they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one such evening, nearly 10 years into their marriage. "Coming to Redemption Springs?" "Marrying a man with a shadowed past." Virginia turned to him, her eyes still bright with the same determination that had caught his attention on that dusty street so long ago. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment, even when it was hard. When the drought came, or when Robert was sick that winter, or when my past nearly caught up with us in Cheyenne." "Especially then," Virginia replied, squeezing his hand. "Those moments showed me the true strength of what we've built together. We faced them all and emerged stronger." Jacob lifted her hand to his lips. "You amazed me that first day, standing there in the dust, exhausted from your journey but refusing to back down when everyone told you to leave." Virginia laughed softly. "I was terrified. But I had nowhere else to go, and something about this place felt right, despite the unwelcome reception." "Something about you felt right," Jacob corrected. "From the moment I saw you." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, their conversation drifting to plans for the children's education and the town's continued growth. In the distance, the lights of Redemption Springs twinkled like earthbound stars, a visual reminder of all they had helped create. Their journey had not been without challenges. There had been droughts that threatened the ranch, economic downturns that affected the boarding house, even a brief period when Jacob's past had threatened to expose him. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. "I love you, Virginia Yates," Jacob whispered as they finally rose to go inside, the night air growing cool. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." Virginia smiled up at him, her heart still quickening at his touch even after a decade of marriage. "And I love you, Jacob Yates. Always have, always will." Together they walked into the home they had built. Surrounded by the life they had created, a life neither could have imagined that day when a dust-covered young woman stood defiantly in the main street of Redemption Springs, and a cowboy with a shadowed past stepped forward to defend her. They had both found where they truly belonged, with each other, always.